Litt bedre? Greit? Ok, takk Eska. Tech person Eska, everybody! Yes, vi bruker ikke å se så mye til gjengen som sitter på tech. Det er hyggelig å se deg. Skal vi resume det, så jeg visste ikke at jeg kunne pause det. Funker den? Nei? Ok. So we're gonna try this again. Hello! You've all seen me running around this convention and been introduced to me as Carolina, because, you know, that was the name I was born with. But I do write under the name Carola Elvira. I used to write under my given name because I was young and stupid and didn't realize that pseudonyms was a thing, and that it was a little cooler to have a cooler name when you wrote. So I finally changed my pen name. I am completely to the core rotten. And I've been so since 2004, hence the citrus scale. I'm a BL author. I made my debut in 2010. I have published 4 BL novels, the most recent being over here. And when I don't do Turkon and writing, I do panels like this. I work for various cultural events. And I like to think of myself as a hobby academic within the realms of BL and manga literature in general. And I've also recently become a podcaster for Nerdpod with my co-host Nils over here. And also the Yaoi Shelf, which is a monthly BL podcast where we just sit around and rant for an hour about things, and mostly we talk about Hero Academia a lot. We talk about gravitation every single episode. And if you want to follow us, follow the Yaoi Shelf or follow me, because now you looked at my face for a long time. But okay, let's get to the actual thing. We're here to talk about boys love, BL for short. And there are a lot of words that are connected to this term. We have shonenai, we have june, we have yaoi. We have that very interesting way of spelling yaoi. And they all mean the same. And I'm going to talk about that. Boys love is an umbrella term that incorporates all of these. And when we think about BL, when we think about this genre, we think about a lot of tropes and characteristics, and they are typically shaped by some very core dynamics that you find in BL. So typically you think of the seme-uke dynamic. So seme is Japanese for the attacker. He's the aggressive one, he's on top. And then you have the uke, who is the receiver. Sports terms, everybody. Everyone knows sports anime is gay. And typically they are recognizable from physical features. So you can look at the top image and see Eiki-Eiki's love stage, and you'll know from their physiques who's the seme and who's the uke. Because the seme is typically he's taller, he's older, he's broodier, he's moodier. and he's typically a little bit more masculine, and the uke is like, oh, he's small and he's cute and he's innocent and he's naive and maybe even a little dumb, but we all, but they're lovable. But it isn't always like that, because if we look at Inoue Sato's 10 count, not 10 count, that's another favorite, 10 dance, we can see that there are a lot of different dynamics and characteristics as well. So we also have variations, like we have the Yancha uke, who's like the kind of like a badass uke, and the Hetare sema, who's like being bullied by the ukes. There are a lot of dynamics, but this is what people think about. And then they think about the fans. And the fans of BL, we are known as Fujoshi. The girl version is Fujoshi. It means rotten woman. We have Fudanshi, the rotten men. And for all of you non-binary hosts, we have Fujin, rotten people. And a common myth is, okay, so BL is made by women for women, right? Maybe not. We're going to talk about that. We're going to ask the question, is this true? Is it really true that only cis women, spoiler, no, create and consume BL? Why is it that there are so many BL pairings? What does feminism have to do with anything? And is it really fetishization? I can't say that word, by the way. I've been trying for months. And in order to answer these, we have to look a little bit at the past. So we're going to take a historical deep dive and have a look at the way that BL has evolved until today. This is my timeline. It is hideous, so we're going to keep moving. And we're going to go to the 1970s. So the 70s, all over the world, we see countercultures, right? We see a lot of radical movements, we see feminist movements, they happen everywhere. And in Japan, women in particular are driving the feminist movements, the radical movements, through kawaii culture and manga culture. So in the 70s, shoujo manga, directed at girls, commonly thought of as sparkles and cute boys and bubbles and huge eyes, has its golden age. And BL comes into existence as a subgenre of shoujo manga. So this is largely thanks to a group of women that are known as the Year 24 group, or the Hana no Nijunen Gumi, the Fabulous 49ers, or the flower generation from the 24th. I think it's the 24th year of Showa, so it's in the Japanese calendar, and then 1949 our time, which is around when they were born. And these women, they revolutionized the way that shoujo manga dealt with a lot of things and told stories. So through their narratives, through their stories, they dealt with not only queer content, but they dealt with trauma, with abuse, with a lot of dark and deeper content than manga typically directed at women used to. And the Year 24 group in particular were really revolutionary in this aspect. We're going to talk mainly about two of them, but I want to point out Ikeda Ryoko before we move on. So Ikeda Ryoko is the creator of Rose of Versailles, famously, but also had a very early on one-shot manga called Claudine, which has a trans protagonist. We also see Moto Hagio a little later on in her sci-fi manga, They Were 11, who brings in a character named Frodo, who is showing a very interesting perspective of not only gender as a whole, but what it means to be a woman and why you don't want to be a woman. So these creators aren't solely focusing on queer narratives, nor are they the first one to do so, but they do it in a way that is incredibly influential on shoujo manga. So they're not the first to do queer narration. We had Morimari, who did short novels. There's a manga by Minigishi Hiromi called Jujika, which actually isn't only has like a quear couple as the main characters, but they're also an interracial couple. So they're a very, very, it's a very progressive manga, but it's still light years away from what we think about when we think about BL. And so we're going to talk mostly for this bit about two mangaka known as Takemiya Keiko and Moto Hagio. And these two women completely revolutionized and changed the manga world. So in 1970, Takemiya Keiko makes a manga, publishes a manga, it comes out in, I think, December, called Sanru Munite, In the Sunroom. This shoujo manga is the first shoujo manga to show a kiss between two male characters. Then in 1974, Moto Hagio publishes the incredibly influential Heart of Thomas. I would talk about Heart of Thomas, but unfortunately, when they finally published it in English by Fantagraphics a couple of years ago, it was a very limited print, and mine got lost in the mail, and it never arrived, and I'm salty about it for every single waking moment of my life since, so we'll move on. So even though Heart of Thomas comes out in 74, it is Takemiya Keiko's masterpiece, Kazutoki no Uta, The Song of the Wind and the Trees, that is considered to be the very first BL manga, or shonenai. And the reason for this is because even though she didn't publish it until 1976, she had been writing this manga and trying to get it published for 9 years already. And they would not let her publish it. They were like, you have to censor this, you have to tone it down. And she was like, hell no, I'm going to do this. And she kept pushing until she was allowed to publish it as it was. And if you ever read Kazutoki no Uta, like even just reading like the first chapter, you're like, oh, okay, this is pretty dark and explicit for something that came out in the 70s. So it's a very influential and important manga that was serialized for 8 years. And so Hagio and Takemiya lived together in this apartment that was known as the Oizumi Salon. And here they would discuss, they would draw, they would work, and they would be essentially peddled to by a neighbor named Masayama Norie, who would supply them with highbrow culture from Europe. So particularly German literature, art, movies, those types of things. And particularly Hermann Hesse, who was a German novelist who wrote a lot about boarding schools and the boys who lived there. And this, of course, became a very, very well-known trope within these types of stories that I keep calling them Haginia in my head. They're just one person at this point. But they were both inspired. So they, and I'm so sorry if anyone here speaks German, because I don't, they referred to these stories as Knabenlied, which literally means boys' love. So you have the German influence, and then also there was this Swedish teenager named Björn Andresen who became incredibly popular through his film Death in Venice, I think, and he became the poster boy for the beautiful Bishonen of the 70s. And this boy was mobbed everywhere when he went to Japan. I have seen, there's a documentary that came out last year about him, it's amazing. And his life was actually really sad. But if you look at him, he actually looks a lot like, for instance, Gilbert from Kazuto Kinuta or Thomas. And so they would take these idealized European, German, or French settings and put their little boarding school boys in them and write these kind of queer narratives. So Hagio kept to Germany, and then Takemiya kind of drew it a little further and wasn't so subtle in her homoeroticism. It was like much more out there, and she set her stories to France as a result. And typically they would do this because the West seems likely, the West seems more open, the West seems more, there's already like kind of like a queer culture. And also it's because it's idealized, so setting it to somewhere else feels familiar. But there were also mangaka who would set their stories to pre-modern Japan, like the Edo and the Heisei era, and they would also idealize those. And then eventually they get into this pattern where you'll have an idealized world, and you'll have a Western setting, but you'll have a Japanese protagonist that's kind of bridging for the Japanese audience. So what's interesting is that if we look at Banana Fish by Akimi Yoshida, without crying, we can say that it doesn't really look like there we go. It doesn't really look like your typical shoujo, but it does have a lot of those same aspects. It has a Western, not so idealized setting, but a Western setting, a Japanese protagonist binding it together. And the interesting thing is because genres are always overlapping. There's not going to be a clean cut between that genre and the evolution is constant. So even though Banana Fish isn't, it isn't classified as a BL, it kind of is, because it still is a shoujo and it has a lot of these elements. And it's very interesting. So it comes in a slightly later time, but it has a lot of the same elements that start to develop in the 70s. Why is there? Oh, right, because there's my slides aren't following me. So basically, the genre doesn't have a name yet. Everything is kind of overlapping. And it isn't until there's an essay called Shonen-ai no Bigak, the aesthetics of boys' love, that kind of settles it. It becomes very popular and people start using this title, and it sort of becomes what they call the title, the genre, so Shonen-ai, boys' love. And this also clashes a little bit or coincides with the term Tambi, which is beauty, romance, aesthetic, and eroticism, decadence, and it's typically applied to prose, particularly Western style like Oscar Wilde, but also Japanese prose by authors like Yukio Mishima, who one who became a fascist. But that's irrelevant. But they also started applying the term to BL, and interestingly, the word Tambi is also the same kanji that we use for the Chinese dammei. So, We're going to take a little step even further back and have a look at pre-modern Japan to understand a little bit where does this queer context what is the queer context? So Japan didn't start being fascinated with homoeroticism and beautiful boys in the 70s. Pre-modern Japan has a really long history of homosexuality. Words like gay and homosexual didn't exist, but it was a very common practice among men, particularly of a specific, of higher standings in society. So like noblemen, merchants, samurai, all had typically younger lovers. And if we look at this quote, which is from, what's his name? Saikaku Ihara, from The Great Mirror of Male Love, he talks about this in his book. This is a quote from the Nihon Shoki, the Chronicles of Japan, where they state that for a very long time there were only male presences in this world, and that is the origin of boys' love, or the love between men. In these texts, Ihara shows us an exchange of vows between a samurai and his apprentice that looks a lot like wedding vows. Because Japanese history, culture, and literature is full, again, of homosexuality. The 3 first generations of the Nihon Shoki in the Shinto religion were all men, suggesting that since there were 3 generations, they reproduced with each other. Which makes sense, because part of the reason why women started writing BL in the first place was that, much like in ye olde Japan, women didn't have a lot of agency. Women didn't have a sexuality. Women's sexuality didn't exist. They weren't important. They were 3 steps behind, and they were supposed to carry children. That was the point. So they were less worth, which means that men were equals. So love between men, better, which, and so we find a lot of practices like what are called wakashudo and nanshoku in Japanese history, where you had these older men with typically younger men who they had love affairs with that were also incredibly idealized. And I'm not necessarily saying that BL draws on this history directly, but the idealized works are definitely inspired by this culture. But okay, let's have a look at the more, I want to say like the recent time, because in my head, 30 years ago was 1970. And apparently that's not true, so I mean, I'm freaking old. So we go to the 80s, and so now the women have revolutionized commercial shoujo manga. But fan culture is growing immensely all over the world, including in Japan. So conventions are becoming a thing. The first Comiket is organized. A large portion of the visitors and the people who tabled there were women. And these people were making what we know today as doujinshi, which are self-made, fan-made comics. And they were commonly referred to as aniparo. So aniparo obviously means anime parody, and refers to works that use characters that already exist, either in a humorous way, or they just take them and make their own story. So it doesn't have to be humorous just because it's a parody. And then typically around these times, sports anime has always been gay. So Captain Tsubasa is really popular. Saint Seiya, really popular. I mean, magical boys, who doesn't love magical boys? But there's a lot of doujin happening. And one day there's a doujin circle in, I believe, 1979. They're called Raburi. And they made an anthology of, not Saint Seiya, Captain Tsubasa doujins. And one of the creators has a story that is called Chasing the Night, which when you write it in Japanese in kanji, you can read it as yaoi. And so the legend says that these women, they sat down and they were kind of like tongue-in-cheek, like, what are we gonna say that yaoi stands for? And they were like, what about yamanashi, ochinashi, iminashi? No point, no plot, no meaning. And there may not be point, plot, or meaning to a lot of these stories, but there's a something. And it is that something between the characters that we are all seeking to explore that we are all seeking to see, and which is why we create fan works, right? So yaoi originally, and still to this day, despite misconceptions, this is the hill I will die on, yaoi refers to fan-made works. It does not have to be explicit in content. It doesn't even have to be gay. It was just that there was such a massive amount of gay doujin that it sort of became the term for it. And as the fan culture is rising, we are also seeing massive commercialism. A lot of publications start popping up, and one of the most important ones is June. So June is a magazine that was originally published in 1978. It didn't have a very long run to begin with. It was known as Comic June. And then when it came back, it was named June. And June was incredibly influential. It had several different publications over the course of its time. I heard that it was closed down in the 2000s, but then apparently there still is some sort of digital version of June that is still alive, so I don't even know. But June was incredibly important because it had the commercialism that it was published by real publishers, with people like Takemiya Keiko editing, with them having, they had columns, they had their series in them. Kazutoki no Uta was serialized in June. And also a lot of amateur works. So people could submit their own works. So there's this meeting spot between amateurs and professionals that becomes really important to the genre. But also, very interestingly, it's a meeting space for prose as well as pornography, and for what we call the queer contact zone. Because even here, they aren't just women. The first editor of June is a man. A lot of the people, he was actually an illustrator for one of the gay magazines in Japan at the time. And a lot of the people who contributed, whether they were illustrators or photographers or writers, they also collaborated with magazines like Homo that were based on the male gay, like the male gay demographic in Japan at the time. And so there's a lot of overlap and crossovers that bridges the Homo community as well as the gay komi. Gay komi is what we know as Bara in the West, and as well as shoujo manga and BL. And June becomes so influential that it becomes another name for the genre. So now it's shonenai, it's shoujo manga, it's June. It has a lot of names. It's also yaoi, so it has a lot of names. And then we go into the 90s. So the 90s is funny because the Japanese economic bubble went pop everywhere, except among the fujoshi, because we know how to spend our money. And so the BL boom continues. And what happens now is that there's a massive commercialization. Someone realizes that there are a lot of people making and writing and reading these comics. Maybe we should start stocking them in mainstream bookstores. And there are new magazines, and we're getting a whole variety of settings. So we've moved away from the sad schoolboys in Germany and the idealized samurai of the past, and now we have settings that are set in modern times, and we have schoolboys, and we have yakuza, and we have futuristic stories. There's a much bigger span of characterizations and settings. And what I think is very interesting is that, obviously, again, this is the clear-cut thing, it's an overlap, but I think it's very interesting that Banana Fish ends in 94, which is the same year that Fake comes out. Because Fake is very interesting in the sense that it does a lot of these things. It has the Western setting, it has a Japanese character, and it does have a lot of that at the time, the aesthetic that was kind of like, it has that sort of like pretty boy vibe, but as we can see, it's not as soft and fluffy as we're used to, and it also features a lot of interesting things, like it has a couple where one of the protagonists is a bisexual. They actually adopt a child. It's very interesting because you see that there's this progression that the genre is evolving. And so as these things become more and more common and more prominent, the bookstores and the commercial bookstores are kind of like, okay, what are we going to call this? We want to sell this. How can we, it has a lot of names, what are we going to do? And because English is cool, Vasego is really cool, they're like, why don't we just call it Boys Love? And they just slap Boys Love on the shelves, and everyone's like, yeah, that's it. So that becomes the dominant term, and it's to this day the name of the genre. And this is the name that they use in Japan. Like, people don't say yaoi, they don't say shonenai, they say Boys Love. And everything here sounds really cool, like there's such a cool progression and so many fun things are happening with BL, but it's not all rosy. 1993 sees a torch being thrown into the feminist magazine Choice, where a queer activist, a gay activist, writes into one of the columns in the magazine and says that it starts what is known as the yaoi ronso, the yaoi controversy, the yaoi debate. And he says that this is not representative for gay men. It's not okay, it's not representative, it's not realistic, it's fantasy, and it's not good. Sounds familiar? And this leads to a 3-year-long debate, because internet didn't exist, so everything here is happening like in monthly publications. It's like, and there's this debate where the queer activists and the feminists are arguing, because the feminists and the mangaka, they're arguing that, but it's not supposed to be representative, it's not supposed to be realistic. This isn't about gay men. This is about women's right to explore their sexuality in a safe space. It's about exploring your own sexuality, your own identity, because it doesn't exist. And you're not a threat to anyone, because there are no women. Like, patriarchy isn't going to be threatened by, women writing about men, because there are no women in it, so, And so it's not really about the gay men. And still, it's supposed to be a fantasy. And this debate doesn't really reach a proper conclusion, obviously, because we're still here. But it does have some effects. A lot of the men who participated in the yaoi ronso in the 90s, who were gay komi writers, for instance, they've changed their minds. They're more in the middle ground on this. We also have to see this in connection with a different debate that was also happening in Japan at the time, which was between the terms gay and homo, which is where the term gay, as used in Japan, was used derogatory. It was referring to effeminate, emasculated men, transvestites, cross-dressers, and gay men didn't want to be associated with it because they were already being discriminated against, and they didn't want to be associated with it, so they claimed the term homo. So for them, BL represented what they were trying to move away from. But into the 90s, the gay men begin to adapt the Western perspective as gay culture starts growing in the West, and they start adopting the term in a different way, and so that also changes the debate a little. And as well as the mangaka actually beginning to change the way that they write a little bit. Some people took this to heart, and it shapes the genre. So the genre starts dealing with more social issues and serious issues. And then, the BL boom. We're going into the 2000s. So what happens now is that, okay, so there's some debate, but there's a lot of really cool stuff happening. And this becomes known as the Fujoshi boom. What happens is that, again, commercialism, and we get a whole district that is dedicated to us in Ikebukuro. These are my photos. I've been there. It's my favorite place in the world. Otome Road is born. Otome Road is a district in Ikebukuro where there are butler cafes and doujin shops and comic shops and used goods stores that are all catering to female fans and fans of BL. And so there's a lot of these now. And people start referring to this as the Fujoshi boom. And it's funny because the word Fujoshi is kind of derogatory, right? Because it's like, you're a rotten woman. Like, you're spoiled for marriage. You can't, because it's kind of like you can't marry someone who's more interested in fictional gay men than real men. But the women, they're like, yeah, I'm going to reclaim this. I'm going to stick to my guns because I am setting my hobbies and my personal preferences above what society wants me to do, which is to get married and have children, which, you know, in Japan is like, that's what you do, and now you can't work anymore. And so they reclaim it. And again, like, because the kanji in Fujo is written with a kanji that means fermented. So it's kind of like kimchi, right? Because kimchi is fermented, but it's delicious. So, and so the fujoshi boom is happening. There's a lot of stuff going on in Japan, but also globally, because suddenly we have something called the internet, and it starts spreading around the world. And Korea decides that, hey, we don't hate Japan as much anymore, so we're gonna like not ban all of their pop culture. So Korea starts importing music and comics, and BL starts spreading to Korea as well, and then further east in Asia. And so we have, okay, internet, great, global fandoms. And I mean, I'm very grateful for the global fandoms, because I wouldn't be here otherwise. Like, I wouldn't have my favorite bands, I wouldn't be doing this, I wouldn't know what any of this was. But with translations and fan translations were our saviors, okay? I'm from the dark ages of the internet. We didn't have anything. It wasn't like Crunchyroll. We were in dank forums trying to download 4-part files that had to be joined with HG split, and then hopefully they were subbed. and you know, so fan translations did a lot for fan culture as a whole, because it gave us a fandom, it gave us a place, we found our people, we found our stuff. And suddenly, the West starts realizing that, hey, this manga thing is kind of cool, let's import it. But at this point, fan culture has already made a few mistakes, because when you take something from one culture to another, and you're not a localizer, you're not a translator, so you start translating things a bit funny. And so we didn't have the word BL. I never heard of boys' love when I was 14. I had heard of shonenai, which was sweet and fluffy and innocent, and yaoi, which was explicit porn that you wanted to find. That was the goal. There were no 18 plus spaces on the internet when I was 14. We were all in there doing horrible things. And so there are a lot of misconceptions that happen because of this. And let's see. And so many mistakes were made. And so the mistranslations and the terms, interestingly, when you take a term like, for instance, the way that we have chosen to interpret yaoi, that has now become a part of our culture. So there's a divergence here of Japanese manga culture and Western manga culture, because even though it's technically incorrect, these are the terms that we've grown up with. This is how we associate them, and unfortunately these things don't die. But the mistranslations aren't the worst. There are a lot of contextual issues that happen, which I will get into a little bit later. So why then? Is it that we're going to talk a little bit debate, we're going to talk a little bit about demographics before we go back into the misconceptions. Because some of the misconceptions, okay, but why are there so many gay ships? And why are so many of us AFAB people fans of BL? Well, what is up with women, or people perceived as women, assigned a female gender at birth? Why are we so obsessed with this? And what exactly is a gay text? We just did a whole episode on this at the Yaoi Shop, where we had this amazing man that I'm going to keep quoting for the rest of this presentation, Dr. Thomas Baudinet, who is a scholar, he's a lecturer, he's researched BL and manga culture and idol culture for many, many years. He can say all of these things a lot better than I can, but I'm going to try to paraphrase him a little bit. And he says that, first of all, and again, like I said, male characters have more agency. When you look at a series, I'm not going to name any names, okay, but here's the thing. When you have a shonen series, and you know that dude is going to end up marrying that girl, and the only reason he's going to marry her is because, well, they knew each other when they were children, and she's a girl. Okay. Meanwhile, he spends 698 chapters chasing after friend while screaming his name and dreaming about him and asking, oh, I wonder what Sasuke's doing now. And I'm just saying that male characters have agency. They have chemistry. And they have a lot of things that draw us to them. And that is why we ship them. Also, there are fewer women pairings because there are fewer women characters. And in the words of Dr. Baudinette, there's also less ship hate for people who ship femme couples because, women don't have a sexuality, so it's not problematic that you're shipping them because, we're still here. We've been here. I'm so tired. And so he says that what is important for academics in BL circles and fan culture research in general to understand is that we can't only research the texts. We have to look at the fans. Who are the fans? What are the fans doing with the text? In the words of Dr. Thomas, a gay text is just taking the text and making it gay. So if you are reading that subtext and you interpret it as gay, then that is gay text. Queer people recognizing things in characters and in stories automatically makes it queer. So when Dr. Thomas Baudinette talks about queer texts, he talks about, or queer shipping practice, like queer fandom is just queering it yourself. And like he says, I like to call this reverse rainbow capitalism. Because if the big corporations can take our pride flags and slap it on something to make money, why can't we take their overtly gay things and create something for ourselves? And that's what a gay text is. And so there's been a lot of research lately in Japan and as well as in the West. The Japanese research is very, very limited. There's very limited English translations available, but there have been some that have researched and surveyed the audiences and established what we already knew, that women are not the only people creating or consuming BL texts. In Japan, and I believe it was like 2010, there was a magazine article that was based on a survey that they did about men who read BL and straight cis men read BL. And one of the reasons that the informants stated that they did this was because of the way that not only the homosocial bond, because it doesn't have to be about the men being lovers, but it's about the relationship between them. And a lot of men also like the way that there were alternative versions of the portrayal of masculinity. Because if you look at shonen manga, the masculinity, you're like Goku all the time. You have to be like really heroic and really muscular, and even though underdogs exist, there's this idea of what masculinity is. But in BL, because all the characters fill different roles and they're all men, they fill different roles and different ideals of masculinity. Then we have the BL Fan Project, which is an ongoing fan project by a researcher named Eri, who has been doing surveys around the internet for a while on who these global fans of BL are. And as we see from the charts here, spoiler, they're not all cis women, that's for sure. And people give different reasons. Like, what's your reason for enjoying this content? And for some people, it has to do with exploring identity. We're doing a panel on stage later on about finding your identity and your gender through cosplay. And it's the same with fan works, because it's this safe space where you can explore. So for a lot of people, a lot of us, and we did another episode about this on the Yaoi Shop, we call it the Fujin to Queer pipeline. Because a lot of us, including my entire friend group, we started out as what we thought were cishet women. And then look at us now, 15 years later, we're all queer somehow. There's not a single straight person among us, and there's not a lot of cis people among us anymore either. So for a lot of people, it's been helpful to explore your identity and sexuality. And for some people, it's taking power of your own narratives, like telling your own story, researching your own story, and coping with things in a safe manner, in a safe space, because it's fiction. And for some people, it's what they call tada tanushii dake. it's fun. Because, you know, guess what, spoiler, you're allowed to enjoy content without any reason. You can have fun, it's allowed. You can be critical. You can think that, okay, this is slightly problematic, but you can still, oh my god, it's my family. And you can still think that it's, okay, now I lost my train of thought. But you know, you can still enjoy something even though you have a critical view of it, because you can do that. And then you have community, moe banashi, sitting with your friends and being like, oh, he looked at him that way. Did you see the way they talked to each other in that episode? It's like, that's the best feeling ever. And so, we've heard it before. We heard about the yaoi ronso in the 90s. It's the same debate, right? Nothing's new under the discourse on all this new critic. We saw it before. And we have to remember that us queer people, we're not a hive mind. My experience and what represents me as a queer person isn't necessarily the same as my friends. When I talk to my BL friends who write BL, my colleagues around the world, I have friends who create comics who live in countries where BL is essentially not allowed. You have to read it online, often illegally, because you can't import it, because all the mail is checked at the post office. It's confiscated. Who am I to be in a privileged position sitting in Norway where we have a lot to work on, but still very much privileged, to say that just because they don't have marriage equality represented in this story, just because they don't deal with our Western ideals of representation, it's bad representation or it's not representative in the slightest. Because it's subjective and it has to do with cultural context, historical context. You have to know your queer history, you have to know your fandom history, where we came from. And the fact that a lot of countries are still dealing with the things that we dealt with and that we are still dealing with, but several years ago, where you can't blame China or Chinese Dammei writers for censoring Dammei when explicit homosexuality isn't allowed to be expressed in Chinese media. And also, you gotta ask yourself, is it representative in other genres? Like when we talked about the yaoi ronso, we talk about the debate, and what I'm seeing now as well. People saying, I also think this is interesting, this is a side note by the way, but when we talk about BL now, I feel like a lot of people think that BL is live action, because we've been so spoiled. We get so many good, watch Kin Porsche, we get so many good BL live action series, and now people think that, okay, so yaoi is the hardcore, shonen is the sweet, and BL is the live action. Same thing. But okay, so some people are saying, okay, but watch BL, because BL is better than yaoi. It's the same thing. Consume gay komi, because it's better than BL, because BL is problematic. But the thing is, in the words of Dr. Bodinet, gay komi is also full of problematic things. It often has, okay, so you have two characters where at least one of them typically identify as homosexual. But typically, you know, not necessarily typically, but there will be things like non-con, there will be things like fetishized heterosexual men. The only difference really is the claim that, okay, but it's written by gay men, so it's representative, right? Because a lot of mangakas, they write under pseudonyms, because they were smart. There are people that pretend to be a different gender when they write, who write under different pen names. There are creators who write in both genres. And if we look at the gay komi here, I don't think all gay men look like this, and I don't think that all gay men are attracted to this, because clearly people have types. And in this research that Dr. Bodinet recently did, all I'm doing is like plugging Dr. Bodinet, seriously, he's my hero. and he says that he did, and this isn't, this is a very small survey. It had 6 participants. They were gay men, and 4 of them were Japanese, 1 Japanese, Brazilian, and 1 Korean. And he talked to them about BL and gay komi, and what he found out was that they all referred to it as the same thing. They referred to it as gay manga, because they were like, it's the same thing. It has gay content. It's about gay men. What's the difference? And some of them were attracted to this hyper-masculine ideal that, again, grew out of that debate about hard masculinity versus soft masculinity and homo versus gay. And some people are attracted to other character types and other character tropes. And so again, there's this overlap because we have mangaka like Sakira and like Ike Reibun, who writes in both genres and who borrows bits and pieces from each genre. And again, like Baudinette said in this interview, that genre is also being transcended. So what we think about when we think about genre isn't necessarily what the fans think of when they think about the genre. So they don't necessarily make any difference because for them it's representative because I'm a gay man reading about other gay men, for instance. And it isn't necessarily realistic because again, it's supposed to be a fantasy. It's supposed to be something to escape into or something to just enjoy. And everything isn't representative for everyone. But what is interesting is that we're getting a lot of representation in the mainstream. Manga as a whole is getting more and more queer, and it's actually really cool. We're getting things like Tasugare, Our Dreams at Dusk, Number 6, Yuri on Ice, Boys Run the Riot. By the way, Boys Run the Riot is actually translated and localized and entirely by a team that are all trans people, so that's really, really cool. And so, some series, as Sasaki said a couple of slides ago, now my thing is broken here. Some stories are possible because they are BL. But not all gay stories are BL. So Yuri on Ice isn't a BL just because it has gay representation. Just because Victor and Yuri love each other is not BL. But it has an overlapping audience because we all watched it. I mean, I thought it was gay because it's sports anime. I didn't actually expect it. I was pleasantly surprised. But it's interesting because it's getting more and more representation, and as a whole, the BL audience are discovering more things to enjoy, but the mainstream audience are also discovering BL, but also discovering queer stories and narration that is helping them understand the queer community as a whole. And this is really cool. So I could probably talk about this forever, and I'm kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. But so yeah, so a lot of cool things are happening, and on top of that, BL is going global. So I remember being a child in the early 2000s when Starfighter came out, and I was never a fan of Starfighter, but the idea that there was a BL type comic made in the West was kind of new at the time, but now we're seeing all of these global works happening there are webtoons and there are Western manga, there is, Damme taking over the entire world, and a lot of Western BL, and I'm also part of this wave. And I was talking about the law of Jante earlier and how I should probably get better at promoting myself. And as far as I know, I am literally the first published BL author in this country, and I feel like I should, take more credit for that. And what we do is that we bring in new influences to the table. We take our own personal contexts, our cultural and historical contexts, and we filter them into the stories and create a new type of BL. And it's really, really fun to see how many different types of stories and how the genre is changing because of it. They had to be there. We're also queering the mainstream differently in the sense that idols, anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a big fan of idol culture for a lot of reasons. But this is actually really important because when the mainstream also, and I'm bringing in live actions into this because they are such a big part of the global BL movement, because Thailand and the Philippines, and also now Korea, are coming on the field. They say that the Thai wind is replacing the Korean wave, because the Thailand BL scene is wild. I haven't seen a lot, but now Kin Porsche is my life, so I'm just like, this is, if you hear the main theme playing in Cosmos, that's me. The Thai BL industry is interesting because it draws a lot of tourism to Thailand, people who come from other Asian countries to see the locations that were in their favorite dramas. You have companies that use their platforms and idols who use their platforms to talk about equality and talk about gay rights and talk about why these series aren't, these relationships and these series aren't any different from others. And even though a lot of these series can't be shown on linear television because they're still a little too controversial, they're generally streamed, they're still, they're still important because a lot of people are watching them and they're reaching out. And what we see, for instance, in Korea and Japan, which is incredibly interesting, is that the idols are coming on the field. And idols typically have never been in gay content because idols have a lot of strict rules. The Korean idol industry is a carbon copy of the Japanese idol industry. And they are like, okay, so you can't date, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. And so whenever they've been in series, it's typically been straight. But lately we've seen, like, Kieta Hatsukoi in Japan has Johnny's, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? Because Johnny's own the entertainment industry in Japan. You can't do anything without seeing a Johnny's somewhere. But it's queer. And so for a mainstream idol, like Johnny's actors, like the actors of Semantic Error, to step away from the fake skinship that you see in the on stage, the fact that the idol, because the idol industry knows that this makes money, right? They know that they can capitalize on it, so they have skinship, they have fan service. But they are taking the fan service off the stage and into the real world by depicting these narratives and allowing these characters to be, or allowing these idols to portray these characters and for them to basically influence the world outside of BL fans, right? And I think that, it's a very positive movement. It's not as like in Thailand, the Thai BL industry is very special. It's very interesting how they choose to do things. Japan and Korea aren't going that far. But even though this is fiction and it's often idealized or it's really not great, it's still queering the mainstream and really important for the people who live in these countries where it still isn't as accepted as it is for us here in the West today. So where do we go from here? I feel like we've come to some sort of a circle, like a full circle here, because we're seeing a revolution like we did in the 70s. We're seeing a lot of the same debates that have been going on for 30 years, but we're also seeing a lot of new impulses, a lot of changes to the genre, to the manga genre in general, to the BL genre. We're seeing this global influx, and in the academic circles, more of a shift towards not looking so much as Japan, but looking at global BL, particularly in Thailand and the Philippines and Korea, and also looking at the fan experience. Who is the consumer? How are they consuming it? And for what reason? And how does that affect the media? And this is a really cool thing that I am really looking forward to following all of these academics in the future. And then of course, we have all of these cool things, because we have FujoCon, which went on break, but we have conventions, we have all of these simulcasts and translations, and so much BL manga coming out that my shelves are screaming in pain. But it's okay. I've heard that having a lot of books is good because it isolates your house and you use less power in the winter. So I'm doing great. But yeah, so we have all of these things, and so it's actually a really, really good time to be a Fujin, because the world is progressing. Like, yeah, there are a lot of hard things. I go on the internet every day, I'm like, we've just discussed this. You're wrong. It's not, you don't, you know, you get pissed off because people on the internet don't debate with people on the internet. It's not good. But there is a dialogue happening between BL fans and gay comic fans and the international queer community and the mainstream community. And you have creators like Takeshi Matsu on the gay comic side and Yoshinaga Fumi on the shoujo and BL side, who are, again, revolutionizing the way that they are using these genres. So there's a lot of really exciting things happening, and I'm so glad I get to be a part of it. And the history from here is just really going to be, I think it's going to be, continue to be really good. Probably also frustrating, but I think it's really good. So thank you for sticking with me through all the chaos and the babbling. Like, I know I talk a lot. If you have any questions, you can direct them to me. This is my self-plug page. If anyone in this room has pre-ordered books that I have signed for you, they're over here, and you can come and pick them up after, well, basically as I wrap up. And I think I have one that isn't claimed, so if anyone wants one or two, I have a couple. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me. Follow me at Author Carola everywhere. Follow the Yahweh Shelf. And if you want to read Change of Heart, you can get it at Outland, you can get it Amazon, Kindle, whatever. It has fake dating and found family, so I hear a lot of people really enjoy it. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me. Enjoy the rest of the con. It's been great. And if anyone has any questions, please direct them. I'm going to have some water. Drink water over there. No questions?
When I was in here, no one had won your book at the book contest.
Oh.
I said it's yet. So if someone here hasn't tried to win a book at the Linux stand, there's still a chance.
Yes, and that one is actually also signed by the illustrator, so it's a really neat prize, because Benedicta also signed it. She's over on Etchy Ink. So yeah. This was really fun. So if anyone wants to get their book, like, just come and grab it from me. I have it. And I guess if there are no questions, I can take this off, right? I can take it off.